Every night it was the same routine. A father would go to his 7-year-old son's room to say goodnight, knowing that without this ritual, his son would have trouble sleeping. Tonight was no different, or so he thought. The dimly lit room cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the father could feel a chill in the air as he stepped inside. His son was lying under the blanket, but something was off. The father felt an inexplicable unease. His son's grin was unnaturally wide, stretching from ear to ear, a grin that seemed to belong to someone or something else.
"You okay, buddy?"
The father asked, his voice tinged with concern. The son nodded slowly, his eyes glinting with a strange light.
"Daddy, check for monsters under my bed."
The father chuckled nervously, trying to dismiss the growing dread in his chest.
"All right, buddy.
He said, getting on his knees.
Let's get rid of those monsters."
As he lifted the blanket and peered under the bed, his heart froze. There, huddled in the darkness, was his real son, pale and trembling. The boy's eyes were wide with terror, his voice a shaky whisper.
"Daddy, there's someone on my bed."
The father's blood ran cold. He slowly backed away, every instinct screaming at him to grab his son and run. He stood up, his eyes darting between the imposter on the bed and his real son under it. The grin on the bed widened, the eyes darkening with malice.
"Daddy,
The thing on the bed said, its voice now a guttural growl.
won't you tuck me in?"
The father took a step back, his mind racing. He had to get his real son out, but how? The thing on the bed started to sit up, its movements jerky and unnatural. As it did, the room seemed to grow colder, the shadows lengthening and twisting. He reached under the bed, grabbing his son's arm, and pulled him out swiftly. The imposter let out an ear-piercing shriek, a sound that echoed through the house and chilled the father's bones.
"Run!"
The father yelled, pulling his son towards the door. They stumbled into the hallway, the father slamming the door behind them. The shrieks from the room grew louder, more desperate, as if the creature was trying to break free. They fled to the master bedroom, locking the door and pushing furniture against it. The father held his son close, feeling the boy's heart pounding as hard as his own. He dialed the police, his hands shaking. Hours later, the authorities arrived, finding the house empty. The child's bedroom was undisturbed, no sign of the creature that had taken his place. The father and son never spent another night in that house, leaving behind the nightmare that haunted their sleep. But sometimes, late at night, the father swore he could still hear that guttural growl whispering from the shadows.
"Won't you tuck me in?"
In a small, forgotten village nestled at the edge of an ancient forest, there was a legend that every child knew but never dared to speak of after sunset. The elders called it the Whistling Woods. They warned that when the wind blew through the trees and the haunting melody of a distant whistle drifted through the air, one should never follow the sound. Long ago, a woodcutter named Jebediah lived near these woods. He was a sturdy man, unafraid of the dark or the stories that swirled around the village. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep, foreboding shade of purple, Jebediah heard the faint whistle. Curious and defiant, he decided to follow it, scoffing at the superstitions that kept others at bay. The whistle was melodic, almost hypnotic, leading him deeper and deeper into the forest. The trees closed in around him, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The further he went, the darker it became, the only light a ghostly glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Jebediah walked for what felt like hours, the whistle growing louder and more insistent. He finally reached a clearing, where an old, crumbling stone well stood, its mouth gaping open like the maw of some ancient beast. The whistle was loudest here, echoing up from the darkness below. Peering into the well, Jebediah saw nothing but an impenetrable black void. He leaned in closer, his curiosity overpowering his caution. Suddenly, a cold, clammy hand shot up from the darkness, grabbing his wrist with a grip like iron. Jebediah screamed, trying to pull away, but the hand dragged him closer to the edge. From the depths of the well, a face emerged, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce into Jebediah's soul. The creature's mouth opened impossibly wide, and the whistling grew louder, more deafening, as if it was coming from within its very being. With a final desperate yank, Jebediah was pulled into the well. His screams were swallowed by the darkness, and the whistling stopped abruptly, leaving the forest in an eerie silence. The villagers searched for him, but he was never found. They say that on windy nights, if you stand at the edge of the forest, you can still hear the whistle, calling out to those foolish enough to listen. And if you follow it, you too will join the countless souls trapped in the whistling woods, forever lost to its haunting melody.
The hospital at night had a way of warping time and space, the fluorescent lights flickering like dying stars in a forgotten universe. Dr. Harold Winters trudged through the sterile halls, his mind fogged with fatigue. The colored bands on the patient's wrists told silent, grim stories, green for the living, red for the dead. Tonight the hospital felt more like a mausoleum, each echoing footstep a reminder of the souls trapped within its walls. An order came through his earpiece, crackling with static. He was needed in the basement to fetch supplies. The basement. Harold had always found it unsettling, a place where shadows seemed to breed and grow, feeding off the sorrow and pain that lingered in the air. As he approached the elevator, he noticed a woman standing inside, her eyes downcast. Her presence was strange. Patients weren't supposed to be wandering at this hour. But rules had a way of bending in this place, like light through a prism, creating spectrums of reality that only made sense in the darkest corners of one's mind. Harold offered a weary smile and stepped into the lift, pressing the button for the basement. She stood silently, no floor selected. He felt a prickle of unease, a whisper of wrongness. The elevator groaned to life, descending into the bowels of the hospital. The doors opened to the basement, a place where even the air seemed to hang heavier, infused with the scent of antiseptic and decay. In the distance, a man limped toward the elevator, his gait awkward and unsettling, like a marionette controlled by unseen hands. Panic surged in Harold's chest, and he slammed the button to close the doors, shutting the man out. The woman beside him stirred, her annoyance palpable.
Why did you do that? He was trying to use the lift.
Harold's voice shook as he replied,
Did you see his wrist? It was red. He died last night. I know because I did his surgery.
Her silence was oppressive, a thick fog of anticipation. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, she lifted her wrist. The red band gleamed in the harsh light, a garish slash of color against her pale skin.
Like this one?
It was a cold and stormy evening, the kind where the wind howls like a mournful spirit and the trees cast long, eerie shadows. Emily's parents had decided to go out for the night, leaving her alone in their creaky old house for the very first time. Nervous but determined to prove her bravery, Emily locked all the doors and windows, checking each one twice, and then she went to bed. Her faithful dog, Max, a gentle and loving companion, slept under her bed, providing her with a sense of security. Whenever Emily felt scared, she would reach down and let Max lick her hand. That simple, warm touch reassured her that everything was all right. So as she lay in bed that night, she tried to calm her racing heart by petting Max, who licked her hand lovingly. Sometime in the middle of the night, Emily was jolted awake by a strange, whimpering noise coming from behind the wall. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she put her hand down under the bed and felt Max's familiar lick. Comforted, she took a deep breath and drifted back to sleep. But the night was far from over. Again, she was awakened by the same unsettling whimpering. She reached down once more, and again, Max licked her hand. The routine repeated several times, each time the noise growing louder and more insistent, but each time Max's lick calmed her fears. Then there was a new sound, a peculiar rhythmic dripping. The noise was coming from the bathroom, and it filled Emily with a dread she could not ignore. Summoning all her courage, she slipped out of bed and, feeling her way through the dark, made her way down the hallway. The dripping grew louder with each step, echoing in the silent house. She reached the bathroom door, her hand trembling as she turned the knob. The door creaked open, and the sight that met her eyes was more horrifying than any nightmare. There, hanging in the shower, was Max. His lifeless body was mutilated and blood dripped steadily from his carcass, pooling on the floor. Emily's scream caught in her throat as the horrific realization dawned upon her. If Max was dead, then who, or what, had been licking her hand?
It was a night, like any other night, where the moon hung heavy and full, casting long, silvery shadows over the town. A group of boys and girls gathered at a party, their laughter mingling with the whispers of the wind. Down the road, past the last flickering street lamp, lay the old graveyard. It was a place steeped in shadows and secrets, where the gravestones leaned like weary sentinels, and the stories whispered among them were older than memory. As the night deepened, talk turned to the graveyard and its eerie reputation. One of the boys, his eyes gleaming with mischief, leaned in and said,
"Don't ever stand on a grave up there. They say the dead don't rest easy. Stand on a grave, and the one beneath will grab you, pull you under, and you'll be lost forever."
The words hung in the air, challenging and dark. A girl with bright eyes and a fearless heart scoffed, dismissing it as mere superstition.
"I'll prove it's all nonsense,"
she declared, her voice steady and defiant. The boy, never one to back down from a challenge, handed her a knife, the blade catching the moonlight.
"Stick this in the ground,"
he said.
"That way we'll know you really went there."
She took the knife, its weight cold and solid in her hand, and made her way down the dark road, past the last street lamp, into the graveyard. The night seemed to hold its breath as she stepped among the gravestones, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. She chose a grave at random, the name worn away by time, and stood upon it. Her heart beat faster, but she was resolute. She bent down, plunged the knife into the soil, and turned to leave. But something was wrong. She couldn't move. Panic surged through her as she struggled, but an unseen force held her fast. Minutes turned to hours, and when she did not return, her friends, their bravado fading, went to look for her. They ventured into the graveyard, their torches flickering in the darkness. They found her clothes first, neatly pinned to the ground by the knife, but of the girl, there was no sign. They called her name, their voices trembling, but the graveyard offered no answers. Then, one of them noticed the ground beneath the knife, freshly turned as if something had disturbed it from below. They backed away, fear clawing at their hearts, and fled the graveyard, leaving the knife where it was. The next morning, as the first light of dawn chased away the shadows, the graveyard keeper found the knife and the clothes, but the earth was undisturbed, as if it had always been that way. And somewhere, deep below, the girl had joined the silent ranks of the forgotten, her fearless heart now stilled. The town spoke of it in hushed tones, a cautionary tale for the ages. And they say if you listen carefully on nights when the moon is full, you can hear a whisper in the graveyard, the voice of a girl, calling out from the darkness, forever bound to the place where she dared to tread.